The letter trembled in Sarah Donovan's hands, the damning words searing into her heart like a branding iron. "You have disgraced this family for the final time. Do not return." Her father's signature sat rigid at the bottom, unmistakable and unforgiving. The April morning air in Del Rio, Texas felt unusually cold for 1878, or perhaps it was just the chill of abandonment seeping into her bones. Sarah pressed her palm against the slight swell of her belly, barely visible beneath her dark blue cotton dress. 3 months along, and already her life had crumbled like the dry Texas soil in drought. The boarding house room she'd rented was small but clean, though she had only enough money to stay another week at most. "What are we going to do now?" she whispered to her unborn child, her voice catching on the lump in her throat. The mirror hanging on the wall reflected a woman Sarah barely recognized, golden hair dulled by worry, blue eyes rimmed with red, cheeks hollow from the morning sickness that had plagued her for weeks. At 22, she'd never imagined finding herself pregnant, unmarried, and disowned by the family that had once been her entire world. The knock at her door startled her so badly she crumpled the letter in her fist. "Miss Donovan, you've got mail, Mrs. Peterson," the boarding house owner, slipped an envelope under the door without waiting for Sarah to answer. Sarah snatched it up, her heart racing with foolish hope. Perhaps her mother had written secretly, offering some comfort or aid. But the envelope held only the anticipated response from her aunt in San Antonio, another rejection. "I cannot harbor a woman of your circumstances," her aunt had written. "Think of my daughters and their prospects." Sarah sank onto the bed, the weight of her situation pressing down on her shoulders. The child's father, a smooth, talking salesman passing through Del Rio, had disappeared at the first mention of her condition, leaving nothing but empty promises and a growing child in his wake. Her father, a respected banker with political ambitions, had given her an ultimatum: give up the baby and return home claiming illness, or leave forever. Her refusal had led to this complete abandonment. A wave of nausea forced Sarah to her feet and over to the wash basin. After the sickness passed, she splashed water on her face and stared at her reflection again. Time was running out. She needed work, a place to stay, and anyone who might help a fallen woman with nowhere to turn. "We're going to be fine," she told her reflection, summoning a strength she wasn't sure she possessed. "We have to be." Outside her window, Del Rio continued its daily bustle, indifferent to her plight. Wagons rattled down the street, cowboys shouted to one another, and somewhere a piano played a lively tune that seemed to mock her circumstances. The Rio Grande flowed nearby, a constant reminder of the border between what had been and what would be. Sarah gathered what courage remained and prepared to face the town that would soon know her shame. She had 1 week to change her fate. The Del Rio sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah made her way down the dusty main street. Her parasol offered little relief from the heat, but it served another purpose, shielding her face from curious onlookers. The mercantile, the dressmaker's shop, the local newspaper office, she'd visited them all, and each had politely but firmly turned her away. "We can't have your sort working here," the dressmaker had whispered, not unkindly. "Bad for business, you understand." She understood all too well. Her father's influence stretched throughout Del Rio, and few would risk his displeasure by helping his disgraced daughter. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Sarah step aside. A group of cowboys rode past, laughing and covered in trail dust. One of them, a tall man with dark hair beneath his worn Stetson, glanced her way. For a brief moment, their eyes met before Sarah looked down, clutching her parasol tighter. She continued walking until she reached the edge of town, where the humble church stood. Perhaps the preacher's wife might know of someone who needed help, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. As she approached the whitewashed building, voices drifted through the open windows. Most unfortunate situation. Banker Donovan was quite clear anyone who assists that girl will find themselves unwelcome at the bank. Sarah froze, her hand halfway to the door. But the poor girl, Reverend, surely Christian charity, Mrs. Bell, I sympathize, but we must consider the entire congregation. Mr. Donovan is our most generous benefactor. Sarah backed away, her last hope evaporating like morning dew. Even the church would not stand against her father's influence. She wandered to the small bridge spanning the creek that fed into the Rio Grande. Leaning against the railing, she watched the water flow beneath her, feeling just as swept away by forces beyond her control. "Excuse me, madam. You dropped this." Sarah turned to find the cowboy she'd noticed earlier holding her handkerchief. Up close, she could see his eyes were a striking green, set in a sun-weathered face that suggested he spent most of his life outdoors. "Thank you," she murmured, reaching for the handkerchief without meeting his gaze. "Samuel O'Malley," he said, tipping his hat. "Just rode in with a cattle drive from the Rockingham Ranch." "Sarah Donovan," she replied automatically, then winced at revealing her name. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, but his expression remained neutral. "You look like you could use a friend, Miss Donovan." Sarah laughed bitterly. "I'm afraid friendship with me comes at too high a cost in this town." Samuel leaned against the bridge railing beside her, looking out at the water. "I don't much care for town politics. You should. My father owns the bank, and he's made it clear that anyone who associates with me will regret it." "Why's that?" Sarah turned to study him. He seemed genuinely curious rather than judgmental. Still, she hesitated. "Never mind," Samuel said. "Not my business to pry." "I'm unmarried and with child," Sarah stated plainly, watching for the disgust or contempt that would surely cross his face. "My family has disowned me." Instead of recoiling, Samuel simply nodded. "That's a tough hand to be dealt. You don't seem shocked." "The world's full of hardship, Miss Donovan. Judging others for theirs isn't my way." He straightened up. "Have you eaten today?" The unexpected question caught Sarah off guard. She hadn't, in fact. Morning sickness and worry had stolen her appetite. "I thought not. Come on, then." He gestured toward town. "Rosa's Cantina makes a stew that'll put meat on your bones." "I couldn't possibly. I just finished a cattle drive. Got money burning a hole in my pocket and nobody to spend it on." His smile was warm and genuine. "No strings, Miss Donovan, just a meal." Sarah should have refused. A proper lady would never dine alone with a stranger, especially a cowboy. But she was hungry, tired, and running out of options. "Just a meal," she agreed cautiously. Rosa's Cantina sat at the edge of town, far enough from the center that Sarah felt she could breathe easier. The owner, a plump Mexican woman with a kind smile, led them to a corner table and brought bowls of fragrant stew without comment. Samuel removed his hat, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. He ate with the hunger of a man who'd spent weeks on the trail, but his manners were surprisingly refined. "So," he said after a while, "what's your plan?" Sarah stirred her stew. "I don't have one. Every door in town has closed to me." "What about leaving Del Rio? And go where? With what money?" Sarah shook her head. "I have enough for another week at the boarding house and then family elsewhere, none who will acknowledge me." Samuel considered this, his green eyes thoughtful. "The Rockingham is looking for a cook's assistant. Owner's wife, Mrs. Miller, is getting on in years and needs help." Sarah's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "A ranch, 15 miles east, good people, fair pay with room and board. They wouldn't want someone in my condition." Samuel shrugged. Mrs. Miller had 6 children of her own. She's not one for passing judgment. He took another bite of stew. I could speak to them. Why would you do that? You don't know me. My mother found herself in similar straits once, he said quietly. She didn't have anyone to lend a hand, died bringing my sister into the world. Sarah's heart clenched. I'm sorry. Was a long time ago. He cleared his throat. Point is, sometimes folks need help, don't always need a reason beyond that. Sarah studied him, searching for any sign of deception. All she found was sincerity in those green eyes. I'll think about it, she said finally. Fair enough. Samuel pushed his empty bowl aside. I'm staying at the livery until tomorrow. If you decide you want me to speak to the Millers, find me there. As they left the cantina, Sarah felt eyes on her townsfolk watching, judging. A woman across the street whispered behind her hand to her companion. Samuel must have noticed because he stepped slightly closer to Sarah, as if shielding her. Don't let them trouble you, he said softly. Most folks are too busy with their own sins to truly care about yours. At the boarding house, he tipped his hat. Remember, livery until noon tomorrow. After that, I'm headed back to the Rockingham. Sarah watched him walk away, his tall figure straight and unhurried. For the first time in weeks, a tiny flame of hope flickered in her chest. That night, as Sarah lay in her narrow bed, a commotion in the street drew her to the window. Through the darkness, she could make out a group of men outside the saloon. One of them, his voice carrying clearly through the night air, was her father. Taught her a lesson she won't forget. No daughter of mine will bring such disgrace upon our name. What about the baby, Richard? Asked another man. No concern of mine, her father replied coldly. Let her reap what she's sown. Sarah backed away from the window, her hand covering her mouth to stifle a sob. Any lingering hope that her father might relent died in that moment. By morning, she had made her decision. The livery stable smelled of hay, leather, and horses. Sarah found Samuel brushing down a sturdy chestnut gelding, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. I'd like to accept your offer, she said without preamble, if it still stands. Samuel looked up, a smile spreading across his face. It stands. I'll talk to Mr. Miller today. When would we leave? If you're ready, I can come by for you tomorrow morning. Sarah nodded. I'll be ready. True to his word, Samuel arrived at the boarding house at dawn the next day, driving a wagon rather than riding his horse. He loaded Sarah's 2 small bags with care. The Millers are good people, he said as they set out, leaving Del Rio behind. Mr. Miller's getting on in years, same as his wife. They've got a son, Thomas, who runs most of the operation now. Fair man, bit serious. And they know about my situation, Samuel nodded. Told them everything. Mrs. Miller said to tell you she's looking forward to having another woman around the place. Relief washed over Sarah. Thank you. No need for thanks. Just doing what's right. The journey took most of the day. As Del Rio disappeared behind them, Sarah felt the weight on her shoulders lighten with each mile. Samuel proved to be a considerate traveling companion, stopping whenever she needed rest and sharing stories of his time as a cowboy to distract her from the discomfort of the wagon. How long have you worked at the Rockingham? She asked as they crossed a shallow stream. Going on 5 years now. Started as a regular ranch hand, worked my way up to foreman last year. You must be good at what you do. Samuel shrugged modestly. I understand cattle and horses. Men, too, for the most part. And women? Sarah asked before she could stop herself. That drew a laugh from him. Not nearly as well, I'm afraid. My experience is limited. By late afternoon, they crested a hill, and the Rockingham spread before them, a sprawling ranch nestled in a verdant valley. A substantial 2-story house stood at its center, with bunkhouses, barns, and corrals arranged nearby. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures. It's beautiful, Sarah breathed. "Home," Samuel said simply, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. As they approached the main house, a woman emerged onto the porch. She was small and wiry, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. Despite her age, she moved with energy as she came to greet them. "You must be Sarah," she called. "I'm Martha Miller. Come in, come in. You look exhausted, poor dear." Before Sarah could fully register what was happening, she found herself ushered into a warm kitchen, seated at a large wooden table and presented with a cup of tea and a slice of freshly baked bread. "Samuel told us about your situation," Martha said, her kind eyes assessing Sarah. "Any woman brave enough to face the world alone for her child's sake is welcome in my home." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Martha, please." "Now, Samuel said you're about 3 months along," Sarah nodded, surprised by how easily she could discuss her condition with this stranger when it had been a source of such shame in Del Rio. "My first grandbaby arrived last year," Martha continued, "so I remember well what a woman needs during this time. Your room is upstairs with a view of the pastures. Rest tonight, and tomorrow we'll talk about your duties." True to her word, Martha showed Sarah to a clean, comfortable room with a real bed, a luxury after the boarding house. Through the window, Sarah could see the ranch hands returning from the day's work, Samuel among them, his tall figure distinctive even at a distance. That night, for the first time in months, Sarah slept without nightmares. Life at the Rocking M settled into a rhythm that suited Sarah perfectly. Her duties as Martha's assistant included helping with meals for the ranch hands, keeping the house in order, and assisting with the kitchen garden. The work was demanding but satisfying, and Martha proved to be a patient teacher and compassionate confidante. The ranch hands, taking their cue from Samuel, treated Sarah with respect. Some were curious about her story, but none pressed for details. Thomas Miller, the son who managed the ranch, was as fair and serious as Samuel had described, a man of few words but clear principles. "My mother says you're a hard worker," he told Sarah one evening after dinner as she cleared the table. "We're glad to have you here." High praise coming from him. As spring warmed into summer, Sarah's body changed with the seasons. Her belly grew rounder, her movements more careful. Martha taught her about childbirth and caring for infants, sharing wisdom gained from raising 4 children and helping countless women in the surrounding area. Samuel, meanwhile, kept a respectful distance. He was unfailingly kind during their interactions, but as foreman, his duties kept him busy from dawn until dusk. Sometimes Sarah would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher before he would nod politely and continue about his business. One evening in June, Sarah sat on the porch swing, enjoying the cooler air after a scorching day. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber, and the distant lowing of cattle created a peaceful backdrop. "Mind if I join you?" Samuel's voice broke into her reverie. Sarah smiled and shifted to make room. "Please do." He settled beside her, his weight making the swing creak slightly. He'd obviously just washed up, his dark hair was still damp, and he smelled of soap rather than horses and dust. "How are you feeling?" he asked, glancing at her now prominent belly. "Growing by the day," Sarah replied with a small laugh. "Martha says everything is progressing normally." Samuel nodded, seeming relieved. "Good, that's good." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing moving gently back and forth. "I got a letter from Del Rio today," Samuel finally said. Sarah tensed. "Oh, from the bank. Your father has apparently been asking questions about your whereabouts." Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. "Does he know I'm here?" "No. The letter wasn't about you directly, just business matters with the ranch account. but the bank clerk included a personal note mentioning that banker Donovan had been inquiring about any young women who might have left town recently. Samuel turned to look at her. "I don't think he knows where you are, but he's looking." "Why? He made it very clear he wanted nothing to do with me or my child." Samuel shrugged. "Can't say, but I wanted you to know." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dress over her belly. The baby kicked as if sensing her distress. "He can't force you to go back," Samuel assured her. "You're safe here. Thank you for telling me." They fell silent again, but the peace of the evening had been disturbed. Sarah couldn't help wondering what her father wanted, to bring her home. Impossible after his public rejection. To ensure she stayed away, most likely. "I never asked," Samuel said suddenly. "The father of your child, do you love him?" The question startled Sarah. "No," she answered truthfully. "I thought I might once." "He was handsome and charming, a traveling salesman with tales of cities I'd never seen. I was naive," she sighed. "When I told him about the baby, he was gone the next day." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Some men don't deserve the title. What about you, Samuel? Have you ever been in love?" He looked away, watching the last light fade from the horizon. "Once. She married another man, a shopkeeper with better prospects than a cowboy. I'm sorry, don't be. She made the practical choice." He stood up, stretching his tall frame. "I should check on the new calves before turning in." "Sleep well, Sarah." As July turned the landscape golden brown with heat, Sarah's pregnancy advanced into its final stages. Her back ached constantly, and her ankles swelled in the summer heat. Martha fussed over her, insisting she rest more and work less. "The baby will come when it's ready," Martha assured her. "First babies often take their time." One sweltering afternoon, Sarah was shelling peas on the porch when a cloud of dust on the horizon caught her attention. A rider was approaching at speed unusual for the middle of the day. As the figure drew closer, she recognized Thomas returning from town much earlier than expected. He dismounted in a hurry, his normally composed face tight with concern. "Is Samuel back yet?" he asked without preamble. "I haven't seen him since breakfast," Sarah replied, setting aside her work. "What's wrong?" Thomas hesitated, his eyes flicking to her pregnant belly. "Nothing for you to worry about, just ranch business." But something in his manner made Sarah uneasy. When he disappeared into the house, she carefully rose and followed, moving quietly to stand near the office where Thomas was now speaking with his father. "Banker from Del Rio," Thomas was saying. "Richard Donovan, asking very specific questions about a young pregnant woman." Sarah's blood ran cold. "He knows she's here." Mr. Miller's voice was sharp. "Not yet, but he's determined. Says it's a family matter that needs resolving." "That girl has found peace here," Mr. Miller replied firmly. "I'll not have her disturbed." "He's threatening to call our loans if we don't cooperate. Says he has influence with banks across the territory." There was a heavy silence. "We need to warn Samuel," Mr. Miller said finally. "He brought her here. He'll want to handle this." Sarah retreated to the porch, her mind racing. Her father was coming for her, but why? The answer came with sickening clarity: public image. With his political ambitions growing, he couldn't risk his disgraced daughter telling her story to anyone who might listen. Better to find her, shut her away somewhere, and control the narrative. Her hand went protectively to her belly. "We won't let him," she whispered to her child. Sarah was still sitting there, planning her next move, when Samuel and several ranch hands returned from the range. Thomas met them in the yard, speaking urgently to Samuel, whose expression darkened with each word. Samuel immediately looked toward the porch, his eyes finding Sarah. He handed his reins to another cowboy and strode toward her, his face set in grim lines. "You heard?" he asked, taking off his hat as he climbed the steps. Sarah nodded. He's coming for me. Do you want to leave? We could get you to San Antonio, maybe further." "And then what? Keep running?" Sarah shook her head. "I'm too close to my time. The baby could come any day." Samuel crouched before her, his green eyes intense. "I won't let him take you against your will. You have my word on that." Something in his voice, a fierce protectiveness that went beyond mere kindness, made Sarah's heart flutter. "Thank you, Samuel." He remained by her side as they discussed options with the Millers. In the end, they agreed that confrontation was unavoidable. Richard Donovan knew his daughter was somewhere in the area. It was only a matter of time before he found the Rockingham. "Let him come," Mr. Miller declared. "This is my property. I decide who stays and who goes." The next morning, Sarah woke to cramping pains that came and went. Martha, examining her with experienced hands, confirmed what Sarah had suspected. "The baby's coming," Martha announced. "First babies usually take their time, but we should prepare." By midday, Sarah was confined to her bed, the contractions growing stronger. Martha sent word to Samuel and the others, who had been watching the road for any sign of visitors. "Don't worry about anything but bringing this child into the world," Martha instructed. "The men will handle Banker Donovan if he shows up." As if summoned by the mention of his name, the sound of approaching horses reached them through the open window. Sarah tried to rise, panic giving her strength, but Martha gently pushed her back. "Samuel will handle it," she assured Sarah. "Your job is here." Downstairs, voices rose, her father's cultured tones contrasting sharply with the rougher speech of the ranch men. Though Sarah couldn't make out the exact words, the tension was palpable even from her room. Another contraction seized her, stronger than before, momentarily driving all other concerns from her mind. When it passed, the voices below had grown louder. "My daughter and my grandchild," her father was saying. "I have every right. You gave up those rights," Samuel's voice cut in, calm but unyielding. "When you cast her out, when you threatened anyone who might help her. This is none of your concern, Cowboy. You made it my concern when you forced her to choose between her child and your reputation." The next contraction came before the previous one had fully subsided. Sarah cried out, unable to contain the sound. "Sarah!" Her father's voice rose sharply. "Is she in labor?" Martha confirmed from the doorway of Sarah's room. "Now, if you gentlemen would take your discussion elsewhere," but footsteps were already pounding up the stairs. The door burst open to reveal Sarah's father, his face a mixture of shock and something that might have been concern. Samuel appeared right behind him, ready to intervene if necessary. "Father," Sarah gasped as another contraction ebbed. "What a surprise!" Richard Donovan stood frozen in the doorway, staring at his daughter, pale, sweat-soaked, and clearly in the throes of labor. "I've come to take you home," he said, but the conviction had leached from his voice. "This is my home now," Sarah replied, gathering her strength for the words she needed to say. "With people who didn't abandon me when I needed them most. You don't understand. Your mother is beside herself. We can say you were visiting friends, that the baby is a lie." Sarah cut him off. "You want me to build my child's life on a lie." Another contraction seized her, and she gripped the bedsheets, breathing through the pain as Martha had taught her. Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and her father. "Mr. Donovan, I think you should wait downstairs." "Who exactly are you?" Richard demanded, drawing himself up to his full height, though he still had to look up at the taller Cowboy. "Samuel O'Malley, ranch foreman, the man who didn't leave your daughter to fend for herself when she needed help." The two men stared at each other, neither willing to back down. It was Martha who broke the impasse. "Gentlemen, this is a birthing room, not a saloon. Take your posturing elsewhere before I throw you both out." Samuel immediately stepped back, apologizing to Martha. After a moment's hesitation, Richard Donovan did the same. "I'll be downstairs," he told Sarah stiffly. "We'll discuss this after the child arrives." As the men left, Martha closed the door firmly behind them. "Men," she muttered, "always thinking their concerns are more important than bringing a new life into the world." The labor progressed through the afternoon and into the evening. From time to time, Sarah could hear voices from downstairs, her father's and Samuel's predominantly, but the words were indistinct. She focused instead on the monumental task before her, drawing strength from Martha's steady presence and encouragement. As night fell, the pains intensified. "The baby's coming now," Martha announced after checking Sarah's progress. "When the next pain comes, I need you to push." Sarah nodded, exhausted but determined. The next contraction built swiftly, and she bore down with all her remaining strength, crying out with the effort. "Good, good," Martha encouraged. "Again, just like that." 3 more exhausting pushes, and suddenly Martha was lifting a tiny, squalling infant. "A boy," she announced, her voice thick with emotion. "You have a son, Sarah." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as Martha placed the red-faced, wriggling bundle on her chest. "Hello, little one," she whispered, marveling at his perfect fingers, his angry cry, the tufts of dark hair plastered to his head. Martha efficiently completed the delivery, cleaned both mother and child, and helped Sarah into a fresh nightgown before allowing the men to enter. Samuel came first, his expression softening at the sight of Sarah cradling her newborn. "You did it," he said simply, but his eyes conveyed so much more. Richard Donovan followed more hesitantly. He stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, looking at his grandson with an unreadable expression. "What will you call him?" he asked after a long silence. Sarah looked down at the now sleeping infant. "William, after mother's father." Something flickered in Richard's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a hint of the emotion he worked so hard to conceal. "Your mother would like that," he said quietly. "How is she, truly?" Sarah asked. Richard hesitated. "Missing you, she doesn't agree with how things were handled." "Then why isn't she here? You know your mother. She's never defied me in 30 years of marriage." He sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. "Perhaps that's been a mistake on both our parts." The admission, small as it was, stunned Sarah. "Father, Mr. O'Malley and I have been talking," Richard interrupted, glancing at Samuel. "He's made some compelling points about family responsibility. About the kind of man who walks away from his own blood." Samuel stepped closer to the bed, his presence solid and reassuring beside Sarah. "I told your father that a man who abandons his daughter and grandson isn't much of a man at all. Might be harsh, but it's the truth as I see it." Richard's mouth tightened, but he didn't argue. "I came here to bring you home, to protect our family name." "And now?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope for a change of heart. "Now I see that my grandson needs a name he can be proud of, not one that's given conditionally." Richard straightened his shoulders. "I won't pretend to approve of how this came about, but he's a Donovan and so are you. That means something." It wasn't quite an apology, but from her proud, unbending father, it was perhaps the closest she would get. "Will you tell Mother that we're well?" Sarah asked. "That she has a healthy grandson. I'll do better than that. I'll bring her to visit if you'll allow it." Sarah nodded, tears threatening again. "I'd like that." Richard moved closer to the bed, looking properly at his grandson for the first time. "He has the Donovan chin," he observed gruffly. "And his uncle's hair, I think," Sarah replied, referring to her younger brother. As Richard reached out a hesitant finger to touch William's tiny hand, Samuel cleared his throat. "I'll give you some family time," he said, moving toward the door. "Samuel," Sarah called, catching his eye. "Thank you for everything." He tipped his head in acknowledgement, a small smile playing at his lips before he slipped out of the room. The next few weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion and joy as Sarah adjusted to motherhood. William proved to be a strong, healthy baby with a hearty appetite and powerful lungs. Martha was an invaluable guide, showing Sarah how to nurse, bathe, and care for her son. True to his word, Richard Donovan returned a week after William's birth, bringing Sarah's mother with him. The reunion was tearful and healing, though the relationship remained fragile. They stayed only a day but promised to return. "Your father is organizing a trust for William," her mother confided before leaving. "He won't admit it, but he's proud to have a grandson." Throughout this time, Samuel maintained a respectful distance. He visited Sarah and William daily, usually bringing some small gift wildflowers from the range, a wooden rattle he'd carved himself, a soft rabbit skin for the baby to lie on. His kindness never wavered, but Sarah sensed he was deliberately stepping back, allowing her family reconciliation to proceed without complication. By the time William was a month old, Sarah had recovered much of her strength and had fallen into a comfortable routine at the ranch. One evening, as she sat on the porch nursing William, Samuel approached, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "May I join you?" he asked, hat in hand. Sarah smiled and gestured to the space beside her. "Of course." He sat, careful to give her plenty of room. For a few minutes he said nothing, just watched as William nursed contentedly, his tiny hand pressed against Sarah's breast. "He's growing fast," Samuel observed. "Too fast," Sarah agreed. "Martha says he'll be the size of a yearling calf before I know it." Samuel chuckled, then fell silent again, staring out at the darkening landscape. Sarah could sense he had something on his mind. "Is everything all right, Samuel?" He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about the future." Sarah's heart quickened. "Oh. Your father and we've had more conversations since William was born. He's not the man I thought he was at first." "He can be difficult," Sarah acknowledged, "but there's a good heart underneath all that pride. He told me he plans to buy a property near here. Wants to be closer to you and William." This was news to Sarah. "He didn't mention that to me." "I think he wanted to be sure of his welcome first." Samuel shifted, turning to face her more directly. "The thing is, Sarah, I've been thinking about my own future too, what I want." William had finished nursing. Sarah carefully adjusted her dress and lifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "And what do you want, Samuel?" His green eyes held hers steadily. "A family, a purpose beyond just working cattle, a woman to build a life with." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "I know it's soon," Samuel continued. "You've barely had time to catch your breath since William arrived, and I'm just a cowboy without much to my name except what I've saved and what I know about ranching. Samuel, please, let me finish. I've never been good with words, and I've been working on these for weeks." He took another deep breath. "The day I met you on that bridge in Del Rio, you looked so alone it near broke my heart, but you weren't broken, just bent a little by the weight you were carrying. I admired that strength from the first moment." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as Samuel reached out slowly, hesitantly, and placed his hand on William's small back, his fingers touching hers in the process. "I know William has a father somewhere, though the man doesn't deserve the title. But if you'd allow it, I'd like to be a father to him in every way that matters, and a husband to you if you could see your way to accepting a man like me." "A man like you," Sarah echoed. "You mean a man who helps strangers without question? Who stands up to bankers and cattlemen alike when it's right? Who carves rattles and brings wildflowers and never once made me feel like I was anything but worthy of respect?" Samuel's ears reddened slightly. "When you put it that way." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel O'Malley." His face broke into a smile so bright it rivaled the sunset. Carefully, mindful of William between them, he leaned forward and placed the gentlest of kisses on her lips. "We'll build something good," he promised. "The three of us." William chose that moment to let out a forceful burp, making both adults laugh. "I think he approves," Sarah said, smiling down at her son. Samuel and Sarah were married 2 months later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Martha insisted on making Sarah a proper wedding dress, and the ranch hands constructed an arbor of twisted branches where the couple exchanged their vows. William, dressed in a christening gown that had belonged to Thomas Miller's son, slept peacefully in his grandmother's arms throughout the proceedings. Richard Donovan gave his daughter away with a dignity few would have expected from him 6 months earlier. When the preacher asked who gave this woman, he answered in a clear, firm voice, "Her mother and I do, with our blessing." The celebration afterward was a blend of proper society and ranch traditions. Sarah's mother had invited several prominent families from Del Rio, while the ranch hands contributed their own forms of entertainment, including trick riding displays and a rowdy dance that continued well into the night. Through it all, Samuel hardly left Sarah's side, his pride and happiness evident in every glance, every touch, every smile directed her way. "You look beautiful, Mrs. O'Malley," he whispered as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through Sarah. "It's strange," she admitted. "A year ago I never could have imagined this day." "Regrets?" Samuel asked, suddenly serious. Sarah shook her head firmly. "Not one. Every step, even the painful ones, led me to you and the life we're building." Later, as the celebration continued around them, Thomas Miller approached the couple with a proposition. "My father and I have been talking," he said. "We're getting older, and this place is a lot for us to manage. We'd like to offer you a partnership in the Rockingham. You'd have a stake in the ranch, and eventually, when we're gone, it would pass to you and any children you might have." Samuel was momentarily speechless. "That's incredibly generous, Thomas." "It's practical," Thomas replied with his usual directness. "You're the best foreman we've ever had. Sarah's become like family to my mother, and that boy of yours is going to need land to inherit someday." The men shook hands on the agreement, and Sarah felt a final piece slide into place. They weren't just building a family, they were establishing a legacy. As the evening wound down, Richard Donovan approached his daughter and new son-in-law. He'd been subdued throughout the day, watching the proceedings with an uncharacteristic quietness. "I have something for you," he said, handing Samuel an envelope. "A wedding gift." Samuel opened it, his eyes widening as he read the contents. He passed it to Sarah, whose reaction mirrored his own. "Father, this is too much," she protested. Richard shook his head. "It's the deed to the property adjoining the Rockingham to the east. Good grazing land with a creek running through it. I've already arranged the transfer to both your names." "Mr. Donovan," Samuel began. "Richard, please," Sarah's father interrupted. "We're family now." "Richard," Samuel amended, "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything. Just make sure my daughter and grandson have the life they deserve." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "And perhaps consider naming your next son Richard. Family tradition, you know." Sarah laughed, embracing her father tightly. "We'll certainly consider it." As the stars emerged in the clear Texas sky, Samuel led Sarah away from the dwindling celebration toward the small house that would be theirs, until they could build something larger on their new land. William was staying with Martha for the night, giving the newlyweds their privacy. "Happy?" Samuel asked as they walked hand in hand. Sarah stopped, turning to face her husband in the moonlight. "More than I ever thought possible," she said truthfully. He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "When I saw you that day in Del Rio, you looked so lost. All I wanted was to help somehow. You did more than help, Samuel. You showed me what family really means, not just blood and obligation, but choice and commitment. She placed her hand over his heart. You gave us a home when we had nowhere to go. You have a new family with me, he said softly, echoing words he'd said months ago when he'd first brought her to the rocking M. That's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of our lives. As he bent to kiss her, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety or security, but true love, a love born of compassion, strengthened through adversity, and promising a future brighter than any she had dared to imagine when she stood alone on that bridge in Del Rio. Epilogue. 10 years later, the rocking M&O Ranch sprawled across the rolling hills of Val Verde County, its boundaries nearly doubled from a decade earlier. The main house, rebuilt and expanded 5 years ago, stood proudly on a gentle rise, its wide porch offering views in every direction. Sarah O'Malley stood on that porch, shading her eyes against the summer sun as she watched the approaching riders. Even at a distance, she could identify them easily: Samuel's tall figure on his favorite bay stallion, 10-year-old William on the pinto he'd received for his last birthday, and 7-year-old Richard bouncing excitedly on his smaller mount. 5-year-old Mary rode double with her father, her blonde curls so like Sarah's own visible beneath her too large hat. The baby in Sarah's arms squirmed, drawing her attention back to her youngest child. "They'll be here soon, Matthew," she soothed the 3-month-old. "Your father always keeps his promises." Inside the house, Sarah's mother was preparing lemonade while Martha Miller, still spry despite her advancing years, supervised the baking of William's birthday cake. The two women had formed an unlikely friendship, united in their love for Sarah's growing family. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder as the riders approached the house. William reached the yard first, showing off by galloping in a circle before dismounting with the fluid grace he'd inherited from Samuel. "Mama," he called, rushing up the steps to embrace Sarah carefully, mindful of the baby. "We saw the new foals, and Pa says I can help train them when they're ready. Did he now?" Sarah raised an eyebrow at her husband as he dismounted and lifted Mary down. Samuel grinned, unrepentant. "He's got a way with horses, like his father." "Which one?" Richard asked innocently, referring to the biological father William had never met. A momentary tension hung in the air. They had been honest with William about his origins when he was old enough to understand, but Samuel just laughed. "The one who taught him to ride, of course," he said, ruffling Richard's dark hair. "Now go wash up, all of you. Grandma and Mrs. Miller have been cooking all morning." The children thundered into the house, leaving Samuel and Sarah alone on the porch. He climbed the steps slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Hello, wife," he said softly, leaning in to kiss her before dropping a gentle kiss on Matthew's forehead. "Hello, husband," she replied, the familiar greeting still bringing a warmth to her heart after all these years. "Good ride." "The best. That boy of ours has a real talent." Pride colored his voice whenever he spoke of William, pride with no distinction between biological and chosen parenthood. From the first day, Samuel had been William's father in every way that mattered. "He wants to be just like you," Sarah said, leaning into Samuel's side as they both looked out over the ranch they had built together. "Poor kid," Samuel joked, but his arm tightened around her shoulders. Sarah thought back to that desperate young woman on the bridge in Del Rio alone, frightened, with no idea of the happiness awaiting her. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "That day when you picked up my handkerchief?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "Not specifically," he admitted. "But I knew you were someone worth knowing, worth helping." He looked down at Matthew, whose eyes were drooping as sleep overcame him. "Worth loving." The sound of a wagon approaching drew their attention. Richard Donovan, now retired from banking but still an imposing figure at 70, was driving, with Thomas Miller beside him. The unlikely friendship between the banker and the rancher had developed gradually over the years, built on mutual respect and shared grandchildren. "Looks like everyone's arriving for the birthday celebration," Samuel observed. Sarah nodded, contentment washing over her. This was what family truly meant, not just those bound by blood, but those chosen and cherished through life's journey. From the loneliest moment of her life had come this abundance of love, this richness of connection. "Thank you," she said suddenly, turning to look up at her husband. "For what?" "For everything. For stopping that day in Del Rio, for bringing me here, for loving William as your own. For our beautiful children. For this life we've built." Samuel's green eyes, now crinkled at the corners from years of squinting in the Texas sun, softened with emotion. "Sarah O'Malley, loving you and our family has been the easiest and best thing I've ever done." As they went inside to join the gathering celebration, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive in moments of deepest despair. The family that had forsaken her had found its way back into her life, and the family she and Samuel had created together had grown strong and true, like the deep roots of the cottonwood trees along the creek reaching down through rocky soil to find sustenance, spreading wide to provide shelter, and standing tall against whatever storms might come.